Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the soft, starlit sands of ancient Egypt, where the greatest architectural project in human history began not with bulldozers and blueprints, but with bare feet, braided ropes, and priests squinting at the heavens. Imagine yourself there, just before dawn, the Nile's breeze carrying the scent of wet papyrus as thousands of workers stir in their reed huts. You'd think aligning a pyramid to true north would require lasers or at least a decent compass, but no, just a long stick, some string, and a whole lot of patience. Now, you probably wouldn't last a day hauling limestone under the Egyptian sun, let's be honest, you get winded climbing stairs. But that's why we're just drifting along as observers tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love imagining all of you, scattered across the globe, slowly sinking into your pillows as we unravel this mystery together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story starts not with a king's command, but with mud. Lots of mud. Every summer, the Nile flooded, turning the land into a soggy mess and giving farmers, and thus the entire economy, a few months off. Smart pharaohs realized this was the perfect time to put all those idle hands to work. But before the first block was cut, before the priests even began their celestial calculations, the real challenge was housing and feeding an army of laborers. Archaeologists have uncovered entire pyramid towns, neat grids of bakeries, breweries, and dormitories where workers slept on palm fiber mats. The bread ration alone would make a modern bakery weep. Over 30,000 loaves a day, baked in long, narrow molds that left a distinct ridge down the center, a detail so consistent it helps identify Egyptian settlements worldwide. And yes, there was beer, thick, soupy, and probably safer to drink than Nile water. But here's the quirky bit. Payroll records show some workers took sick days for eye problems. Not from the sun or sand, but from the garlic-heavy diet meant to keep them healthy. Ancient OSHA would not approve. Meanwhile, historians still argue whether these laborers were conscripted peasants or willing, paid specialists. Graffiti inside the pyramid suggests team pride, with groups naming themselves Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. The real magic begins not with stone, but with silence. Picture this. You're standing on a stretch of desert just west of the Nile, where the ground has been painstakingly leveled. Not with machines, but with water. Yes, water. Workers dug a grid of shallow channels, flooded them, and used the flat surface as a natural level. Any high spots were scraped away until the entire foundation plane reflected the sky like a mirror. It's the kind of simple brilliance that makes you wonder if we've really progressed all that much. But the true architects of precision weren't the laborers with their copper chisels, they were the temple priests who doubled as astronomers. These men, and likely some women, despite what most carvings show, spent years memorizing the slow dance of constellations. Their tools? A palm rod, a length of twine, and a notched piece of wood called a merkit, basically the ancient equivalent of a protractor made by someone's very patient grandfather. Here's a mainstream fact you might recall from school. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north with an error of just 0.05 degrees. That's tighter than your jeans after Thanksgiving dinner. But here's what they don't tell you. Polaris, our current North Star, wasn't their guide. Earth's wobble means that 4,500 years ago, the pole star was Thuban in the constellation Draco. You can almost hear some exhausted priest grumbling, "Why can't the sky just stay put?" The quirky detail comes from their backup system. On cloudy nights, they used the shadows of two aligned obelisks as giant sundials. And historians still argue whether they understood the Earth was round. Certain temple texts describe the sky as an iron bowl, but others speak of the four corners of the Earth, in what might be either metaphor or flat Earth thinking. Now we come to the humble tools that made celestial precision possible. Imagine holding what looks like a child's toy and being told to build a perfect geometric wonder with it. The main instrument was the bay and imyra, or palm rib with a hole, which sounds like something you'd find in a kindergarten craft bin. This was essentially a sighting tool, a narrow palm rib with a small hole bored through one end. A priest would peer through it at specific stars while an assistant adjusted the angle until they achieved perfect alignment. But here's the twist, they didn't just use one. They set up multiple sighting stations across the desert, creating a giant imaginary grid before a single stone was laid. Think of it like ancient GPS, except instead of satellites, they had exhausted apprentices holding sticks and squinting for hours. And if one of them sneezed at the wrong moment? Back to square one. The real unsung hero of Egyptian astronomy was the Merkit, a notched horizontal bar that functioned like a protractor's depressed cousin. Paired with a plumbline, it could measure the angle of stars with surprising accuracy. Modern experiments have shown that, in skilled hands, these simple tools could achieve alignment within fractions of a degree. Not bad for technology that basically amounts to stick with a string. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some temple reliefs show priests using what appear to be filled water basins as primitive reflecting telescopes. By staring at star reflections in still water, they could minimize eye strain during long observation sessions. Historians still argue whether this was standard practice or just a clever workaround for priests who'd had one too many cups of date wine the night before. And here's something to ponder as you drift off. The Egyptians likely didn't even have the wheel when they built the Great Pyramid. They aligned one of the most precise structures in human history using sticks, string, and sheer stubbornness. Makes you look at that IKEA furniture you struggled with last weekend in a new light, doesn't it? You'd think finding north would be as simple as looking for the brightest star, but the ancient Egyptians had a celestial curveball to deal with. Their North Star wasn't ours. While we have steadfast Polaris to guide us, they had to work with Thuban, a star in the constellation Draco that was only sort of close to true north. Imagine trying to balance a pyramid's entire alignment on a star that couldn't even be bothered to stay put. Because here's the kicker, Thuban wasn't stationary. Due to the Earth's axial precession, that slow 26,000-year wobble we mentioned earlier, Thuban was drifting about 0.14 degrees per century. So how did they pull it off? The priests developed a clever workaround by tracking not just Thuban, but an entire circuit of imperishable stars, circumpolar stars that never dipped below the horizon. They'd mark the midpoint between where a star rose and where it set, creating an average that pointed to true north. This method was so precise that when Flinders Petrie surveyed the Great Pyramid in the 19th century, he found the sides were aligned to within 4 minutes of a degree of true north. That's like hitting a bullseye from a mile away while riding a camel. Now for the delightful oddity. Some temple texts suggest they used the shadows of pyramids themselves as giant sundials to double-check their alignments. There's even evidence they might have employed what we'd now call the Indian circle method, drawing a circle around a vertical rod and bisecting the angles of morning and afternoon shadows. All this to compensate for a wandering pole star that couldn't make up its mind. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians understood precession or simply thought the gods were being fickle. What we do know is that their solution was so effective that when modern astronomers calculated where Thuban was in 2560 BCE, the pyramid's alignment matched perfectly. Not bad for a civilization that thought the sky was a giant iron bowl filled with water. Before the first stone could be laid, the Egyptians performed rituals so precise they make modern ribbon-cutting ceremonies look like chaotic toddler parties. The ceremony of stretching the cord wasn't just symbolic. It was their version of firing up the CAD software. A priest representing Seshet, the goddess of measurement, would hammer a stake into the ground while another priest, playing the role of the king, walked in a sacred circle with a golden mallet. The cord in question was actually a loop of red linen rope, soaked in a solution that made it resistant to stretching, an early example of material science. Here's where it gets brilliantly practical. They'd use this rope to create perfect right angles by employing the 3-4-5 triangle method, knotting the rope at intervals of 3, 4, and 5 units. When stretched taut, it formed a flawless corner. This same technique appears in temple reliefs showing gods literally measuring out the world at creation. The Egyptians weren't just building a tomb, they were reenacting cosmic order in limestone. Now for the wonderfully odd detail, foundation deposits. Archaeologists have found caches buried at pyramid corners containing everything from model tools to ox bones to, wait for it, dried fish. These weren't just offerings, they were ancient time capsules meant to magically sustain the structure. The fish, particularly Nile perch, might represent the primordial waters of creation. Or maybe some priest just really liked fishing. Historians still argue whether the famous pyramidion, the capstone, was gilded and put in place first as a spiritual target for construction. Some texts suggest it was installed in a midnight ceremony using ramps made of pure moonlight, or possibly just very well-polished limestone. Either way, the care taken with these rituals explains why Egyptian monuments didn't just point north, they became north, turning architecture into frozen astronomy. The secret to perfect pyramid geometry wasn't some mystical lost technology, it was rope. Miles and miles of rope. While we obsess over how they moved multi-ton blocks, the real engineering marvel was their ability to maintain millimeter-level precision across acres of construction using nothing but twisted plant fibers and educated guesswork. Work crews used two types of rope that would make modern climbers weep. One soaked in resin for measuring, stretchy ropes were useless for precision work, and another coated in beeswax for marking lines, because nothing says permanent marker like sticky waxed twine. To lay out the pyramid's square base, they'd start with that sacred 3-4-5 triangle we mentioned earlier, then extend the lines using a technique called successive halving, measuring halfway points again and again until the entire perimeter was staked out. Here's the quirky part, they accounted for rope stretch due to temperature changes. Morning measurements were always cross-checked at noon, because a rope that was perfect at dawn might be centimeters longer by midday. Some temple texts even mention rope-warming rituals, where priests would, hug the measuring ropes to keep them at consistent temperature. Whether this actually worked or just made the priests feel useful is still debated. The mainstream fact. The Great Pyramid sides vary by less than 5 centimeters over 230 meters, a margin of error of 0.02%. The fringe detail? Some researchers believe they embedded small copper plates at key points that would expand/contract with temperature, acting as primitive error correction markers. Historians still argue whether these were intentional calibration devices or just fancy construction nails. And here's a sleepy thought, when you look at pyramid diagrams today, those straight lines we draw were actually created by people literally lying in the sand pulling strings taut while someone else squinted along the length shouting, "Left a bit. No, my left." The ultimate, hold my beer moment in architectural history. You might imagine pyramid construction as endless chains of slaves cracking whips, but the reality was shockingly bureaucratic. Work crews operated in rotating shifts that would make a modern union proud. Ostraca, pottery fragments used as notepads, reveal a detailed labor system where workers were divided into fills of 1,000 men, then further into za teams of 200. Each group had delightfully dramatic names like Enduring in Life or Drunkards of Menkor, early examples of workplace camaraderie that probably started as sarcasm and became official. The workday ran from dawn to noon, followed by a second shift until dusk, a schedule designed to avoid the worst heat. Medical records show workers received treatment for everything from broken toes to scorpion stings, the ancient equivalent of workers' comp. There's even evidence of paid sick leave, with one worker's absence excused because his eye was eaten by a fly. Whether this was literal or just the oldest recorded, "my dog ate my homework," excuse remains charmingly unclear. Now for the quirky payroll fact, workers were paid in bread, beer, and occasionally onions, the Egyptian equivalent of pizza Fridays. Accounting tablets show precise ratios, 3 loaves and 2 jugs of beer per day for laborers, with supervisors getting garlic supplements, considered a luxury item. Historians still argue whether this was practical nutrition or early performance-based compensation. After all, garlic does repel parasites. The mainstream record shows a surprisingly mobile workforce. Skeletal remains reveal workers came from all over Egypt, not as slaves but as rotating conscripts. Some graffiti even boasts about hometowns, like ancient Yelp reviews, "The stonemasons from Aswan carve smoother than the Nile flows." As you drift off, consider this. The same civilization that built perfect geometric monuments also left us a worker's complaint that reads, "The bread is stale, the beer is sour, and if I have to move one more limestone block I'm going to throw myself in the Nile." Some things never change. The real muscle behind pyramid construction wasn't slaves or even humans, it was copper. Specifically, copper chisels that dulled after just a few strikes against limestone, requiring armies of workers to constantly resharpen them. Picture the scene, hundreds of men squatting around grinding stones, their hands stained green from oxidized metal, turning what should have been a simple quarry into the world's most frustrating knife-sharpening seminar. Quarry crews worked in staggered shifts, exploiting the stone's natural weaknesses. They'd hammer wooden wedges into pre-cut fissures, then soak them with water until the expanding would split the rock, an early example of hydraulic fracturing that today's fracking companies would recognize, though with far better PR. The real challenge came when extracting the prized white Tura limestone, so fine-grained it could be polished to a mirror finish. Workers had to chisel around these blocks with agonizing precision, leaving just enough connection points to snap them free later. Now for the delightfully odd detail. The Egyptians used dolerite balls, baseball-sized chunks of volcanic rock, as their primary pounding tools. Thousands of these were found in quarries, their surfaces worn smooth from constant impact. Why? Because dolerite is harder than limestone but less brittle than copper, making it perfect for the initial rough shaping. Some even show finger grooves from generations of workers' grips, an ancient version of your favorite kitchen knife's well-worn handle. Historians still argue whether the famous saw marks on some stones were made by actual copper saws, which would have required constant sand abrasive, or if they're just erosion patterns. The mainstream evidence suggests teams used ropes coated in quartz sand to saw through softer stones, a process so slow it makes watching paint dry seem action-packed. And here's a sleepy realization: every perfectly smooth casing stone you've seen in museum displays represents someone's entire workweek spent rubbing it with progressively finer sand, likely while muttering creative curses about the pharaoh's architectural ambitions. The original definition of tedious labor. Every great construction project has its "oh no" moment, and the pyramids were no exception. Deep beneath the Great Pyramid's pristine exterior lies a secret: the original base wasn't square. Early surveys reveal the builders accidentally created a slight rhomboid shape, with the west side running about 14 centimeters longer than the east. Imagine the panic when some sharp-eyed priest noticed the error after months of work. We've built the world's most expensive trapezoid. The correction method was ingenious in its simplicity. Rather than dismantling anything, they adjusted the angles of subsequent layers to gradually steer the structure back into alignment. It's the architectural equivalent of when you realize you're veering off the highway but gently correct course instead of jerking the wheel. Modern laser scans show these subtle adjustments, proving the builders prioritized structural integrity over mathematical perfection, a philosophy that explains why the pyramid still stands while later, more perfect structures crumbled. Now for the quirky survival tactic: workers left secret alignment marks inside the pyramid's core. These hieratic script doodles, things like Team 3, Shift 5, don't blame us for this corner, were never meant to be seen again. Some even include crude stars, likely representing the actual celestial guides they used to check their work. The most poignant: a single palm print in mortar near the king's chamber, left by someone who either slipped or wanted to say, "I was here for eternity." Historians still argue whether the misalignment was caused by foundation settling, measurement errors, or, as one fringe theory suggests, an intentional, imperfect perfection, meant to mirror the Egyptians' understanding of cosmic chaos. The mainstream evidence points to something far more relatable: someone probably misread a merkit during a sandstorm. As your eyelids grow heavy, consider this: the world's most precise ancient structure contains a mistake corrected so skillfully that we only discovered it with 21st century lasers. There's hope for all of us who've ever hit send too soon on an email. The debate over pyramid ramps has spawned more theories than a conspiracy convention, but here's the twist: the Egyptians probably used at least 3 different types simultaneously. Picture a massive construction site where straight ramps, zigzagging switchbacks, and internal spiral tunnels coexisted like some ancient highway interchange. The straight frontal ramp, the obvious solution we all imagine, would have required an unthinkable amount of material. Building a 2:1 incline to the pyramid's peak would have consumed more stone than the pyramid itself. So they got creative. Workers likely began with short straight ramps for the lower courses, then transitioned to a spiraling exterior ramp held together with mud brick and gypsum mortar. But here's the clever part: as they completed each level, they dismantled the lower ramp sections to reuse the material in higher ones. It's like building an IKEA shelf while simultaneously recycling the instructions into the next step. The evidence. Telltale post holes along pyramid edges where wooden derricks may have helped pivot blocks around corners. Now for the delightful fringe theory. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed an internal spiral ramp still hidden within the Great Pyramid's walls. His thermal scans show odd voids that could be ramp tunnels, and the math works. A 6 to 7% grade ramp corkscrewing up inside would explain how they lifted the heaviest granite blocks, some weighing 80 tons, without leaving external ramp scars. The mainstream rebuttal? No one's found the tunnels yet, though that might just mean we haven't looked in the right places. Historians still argue whether they used sledges, wall paintings show them, rollers, log fragments were found nearby, or some lost technology involving wet sand. Experiments show it reduces friction by 50%. The quirky detail? Some limestone blocks have mysterious reed impressions on their undersides. Were they slid on bundled reeds like an ancient version of those plastic furniture sliders you lose under the couch? As sleep takes you, imagine the chaos. Crews shouting directions, ramp supervisors blowing ostrich bone whistles, and some poor scribe trying to calculate ramp angles on a papyrus that keeps blowing away. The original, measure twice, cut once, nightmare. At the heart of the pyramid lies a mystery wrapped in red granite, the king's chamber. This stark, echoey room defies the structure's otherwise perfect celestial alignment. Its walls don't quite parallel the pyramid's sides, and the sarcophagus is slightly off-center. You'd think the most important room would get special treatment, but it's as if the architects suddenly decided, good enough for the pharaoh. The chamber's construction reveals astonishing effort. Its 70-ton granite beams were hauled 600 miles from Aswan, then hoisted 150 feet into position, all to create a space that's acoustically strange. Clap your hands in there, and the sound lingers like you're inside a giant guitar. Some researchers think this was intentional. The resonant frequency matches the human heartbeat at rest. Coincidence? Or were they trying to synchronize the pharaoh's eternal sleep with cosmic rhythms? Now for the quirky construction detail. The chamber's ceiling consists of 9 25-ton granite slabs stacked like a stress-relieving sandwich. But look closer, the spaces between slabs contain flecks of gypsum and crushed limestone. This wasn't sloppy work, it was an ancient seismic dampening system, allowing the stones to shift slightly during earthquakes. The mainstream explanation. Pure pragmatism. The fringe theory. The layers represent the 9 gods of the Ennead, physically holding up the sky. Historians still argue whether the chamber was ever meant to hold a body. No mummy was found there, and the sarcophagus is slightly too large to have fit through the entrance corridor. Was it assembled inside like some morbid IKEA furniture? Or is the real burial chamber still hidden, waiting to be found beneath our feet? As you drift deeper into sleep, picture the workers' final act, polishing every surface to a mirror finish by lamplight, their shadows flickering across stone that hadn't seen sunlight in millennia, and wouldn't again for thousands more years. Midway through construction, the pyramid reached a critical juncture, the moment when stargazing priests had to verify their celestial alignments weren't drifting off course. Picture this, on a perfectly clear night, a team climbs scaffolding to the current summit, carrying nothing but a palm rib sighting tool and a clay tablet for notes. Below them, the unfinished structure stretches into darkness like a giant stairway to the stars. The verification method was deceptively simple. Priests would identify a circumpolar star at its eastern and western elongation points, the furthest it veers from true north, then mark where its light grazed the pyramid's edges. If the marks matched earlier measurements, construction continued. If not, cue the world's most stressful do-over. Some casing stones show tiny chisel marks where minute adjustments were made, ancient quality control at its most obsessive. Now for the delightful oddity. They used the pyramid's own shadow as a giant sundial. At noon, when the shadow pointed due north, they'd check its straightness against guide ropes. Any deviation meant trouble. Workers probably cursed these shadow checks. Imagine being mid-task when suddenly everyone has to drop tools because the sun decided to tattle on your imperfect brickwork. Historians still argue whether they understood atmospheric refraction, that pesky phenomenon where starlight bends slightly when entering Earth's atmosphere. The mainstream view says no, but some temple texts describe stars swimming near the horizon, suggesting they at least noticed the effect. Here's a sleepy thought. Every night you spend drifting off to this story, you're replicating their process in reverse. Your ceiling becoming the pyramid's shadow, your alarm clock's faint glow standing in for Thuban, the distant pole star they worked so hard to please. The pyramid's glittering finale wasn't stone, but light. The outer casing, over 5.5 million tons of polished Tura limestone, transformed the structure into a blinding solar reflector visible for miles. Each block was fit so precisely that a credit card couldn't slide between them, then buffed with quartz sand until the surface could reportedly be seen glinting from the moon, a poetic exaggeration, but one that captures the effect. Applying these casings was like assembling the world's heaviest jigsaw puzzle. Workers started at the top and worked downward, using the completed layers as scaffolding. The final stones at ground level were left slightly protruding. These swelling joints allowed for thermal expansion without cracking the facade. It's the same principle modern engineers use for bridges, just with more chisels and fewer hard hats. Now for the quirky afterlife of these stones. Medieval Cairo was essentially built from stolen pyramid casing. Earthquakes loosened many blocks, and locals happily hauled them away for buildings. The Arabic historian Abd al-Latif wrote in 1200 CE that the pyramid appeared to be covered with a frozen cloth that the hand could slide over without meeting resistance, a description that makes the loss even more tragic. Today, only a few casing stones remain at the base, their surfaces still smooth as porcelain after 4,500 years. Historians still argue whether the capstone was solid gold or electrum, a gold-silver alloy. The mainstream view suggests gold-plated limestone, but a fragment found in the rubble bore traces of mercury. Was it originally gilt with an amalgam? Or did some thief try, and fail, to extract gold leaf with primitive chemistry? As sleep pulls you under, imagine the last worker descending the pyramid after placing the final casing block, stepping backward down ramps that were being dismantled even as he walked, leaving behind a perfect geometric mountain that would outlast languages, empires, and entire religions. With the last casing stone in place, the pyramid's architects faced their final challenge, vanishing without a trace. Unlike modern projects where engineers proudly stamp their names on plaques, these master builders melted back into history like shadows at noon. Court records show they weren't killed to protect secrets, a popular myth, but quietly reassigned, some to temples, others to provincial projects where their skills were needed. A few even received modest tombs near the pyramid, their burial inscriptions simply reading, "Overseer of all the king's works." The real mystery is what happened to their knowledge. Later pyramids show clear declines in precision. The bent pyramid at Dahshur starts at the same perfect 52-degree angle as Giza's pyramids, then abruptly shifts to 43 degrees halfway up when the architects apparently said, "This is taking too long, just finish it." By the 12th dynasty, pyramids were being built around rubble cores with loose stone fill, the architectural equivalent of stuffing your laundry under the bed before guests arrive. Now for the quirky afterlife of their tools. Recent excavations found a worker's toolkit near Abu Sur containing copper chisels, a wooden mallet, and, most telling, a smoothed limestone tablet with alignment diagrams scratched onto its surface. This wasn't some sacred text, but what looks like a foreman's cheat sheet, passed down through generations until someone finally forgot what the symbols meant. Historians still argue whether the knowledge was lost due to political upheaval, or if it simply became economically unfeasible. The mainstream evidence points to both. Why spend decades perfecting angles when you could slap up a serviceable pyramid in a tenth of the time? As you drift towards sleep, picture the last aging architect visiting the finished pyramid at dusk, running a calloused hand over joints so tight they've disappeared, whispering calculations to the wind as the first stars of evening, the same stars that guided his life's work, begin their slow march across the sky. The pyramid's greatest trick wasn't defying gravity, it was bending time. Long after the last architect died, after Thuban drifted from its pole position, after even the meaning of hieroglyphs was forgotten, these structures continued their silent conversation with the cosmos. Modern laser scans reveal something astonishing: the pyramids still move. Their limestone blocks expand and contract with daily temperature swings, the entire structure breathing in and out like a sleeping giant. The north face, warmed by sunlight, can creep outward by nearly 2 centimeters before the cool night pulls it back. What remains is less a tomb than a clock, one that ticks too slowly for human perception. The descending passage, perfectly aligned to Thuban in 2560 BCE, now points to empty space. But in another 23,000 years, when Earth's wobble brings Thuban full circle, the alignment will be perfect again. The pyramids were built with this patience, this glacial sense of time that makes our rushed lives seem like mayfly existences by comparison. Now for the final quirky truth: the pyramids are still teaching us. In 2017, physicists using muon detectors found mysterious voids, spaces we still can't explain. Some believe they're construction gaps, others whisper about undiscovered chambers. The most poetic theory: that the architects left empty spaces intentionally, knowing future generations would need mysteries to solve. Historians still argue whether the pyramids represent triumph or hubris. The mainstream view says both, monuments to human ingenuity that also bankrupted kingdoms. But walk the Giza Plateau at dawn, when the rising sun sets the remaining casing stones ablaze, and you'll understand why the Egyptians called them Ake, the horizon where light begins. As the stars Thuban and Polaris continue their slow dance across millennia, let the weight of these stones lull you into rest. Picture the last workers leaving the plateau at dusk, their shadows stretching long behind them as the first stars appear, the same stars you might glimpse through your half-closed eyelids tonight. The pyramid builders understood sleep as both necessity and art, their headrests carved with protective spells to ward off bad dreams. Breathe deeply, as they did after a day's labor, inhaling the scent of desert sage and freshly cut limestone. Feel the cool sheets as they might have felt smooth granite beneath tired hands. The same moon that illuminated their path home, now silvering your windowsill. All those perfect angles, those painstaking measurements, were ultimately in service of something simple: creating order against chaos, permanence in the face of time's river. Your slowing heartbeat echoes their plumb bobs settling into perfect alignment, your quiet room their finished monument. Wherever you are in the world, whether the first birds are singing or midnight silence reigns, know that the same cosmic patience that built the pyramids cradles you now. The stars they tracked still turn. The north they found still holds. And sleep, that most ancient of comforts, remains our shared horizon. Sweet dreams, time traveler. The stones will keep watch.